This video is a walkthrough of the entire procedure for initial setup of the die set in the CARR AE60 fully automatic eyeleting machine. This procedure is the same for several other CARR models. Let's begin with what we need to do with a new machine. Machines are set up and tested at the factory, but it is possible that parts of the die set might work loose in transit. Consequences of this could range from poor settings to broken parts. There are three components to the die set. The bottom die is located in the center of a part called the ring compensator set, which is immediately below the bottom of the safety guard in the photo shown here. To see the bottom die, this is one removed from the machine. The center blade of this die is used to automatically cut a hole in the material being utilized. You can see the orange material which has been cut by this blade. This happens when the punch, shown in the middle of this photo, descends and meets the blade on the bottom die by cutting a hole in the material. Surrounding the punch, we have the top die, which moves independently from the punch and is used in combination with the outer rim of the bottom die to close the eyelet setting. One of the dangers present in shipping is that a loose bottom die could end up in a position where it is striking the punch hard enough to break the material cutting blade. This would then require replacement of the bottom die. Another possibility is a top die which is either not closing the setting adequately or is crushing the eyelet set. The simple answer here is to go through the die setup procedure before running the machine. The first thing we want to do is move the top and bottom dies away from each other. In doing this, we will prevent any possibility of a broken blade or a crushed setting. In this procedure, we will be working in what could be a very dangerous area of the machine. To prevent any possibility of injury, make sure any electrical and/or pneumatic supplies to the machine are disconnected. As you follow this procedure, you will need to connect the machine to power sources at various times. Make sure that you disconnect it at any points where you are going to have your hands in the danger area. Now let's proceed. Begin by removing the protective guard over the die set area. This is easily done by removing the screw on the front of the guard and loosening the one on the side. Next, we want to get the raceway out of our way. The tool shown here is provided with the machine and is called a puncher. Pull the raceway away from the die set as shown and place the puncher in the hole shown. Now loosen the lock nut which is used to secure the top die in its setting position. If you find that this lock nut is very tight, it isn't likely the top die could have moved in shipment, but by following this procedure you'll know how to do a replacement of the top die at a later time. You'll also know how to reset the top die for perfect closing in a different thickness of material. To better understand the top die and punch set, let's remove it completely and then reinstall. The punch pushes through the top die. There is a spring which is used to keep the punch up as high as possible between settings. To reinstall this into the machine, simply align under the axles at the top of the machine as shown. Gently push up to compress the spring enough to find the threads which secure the top die to the machine. Be careful so you don't cross-thread this part. For now, you want to thread this all the way up into the machine. Note that the lock nut needs to be in the position shown to accomplish this. Lock the lock nut when you're done. Next, we want to move the bottom die down away from the punch. Again, as with the top die, we'll start by removing the bottom die assembly completely to review how we would do a replacement of the bottom die. The bottom die is threaded into a holder, which is in turn threaded into the machine. The holder is secured by a hex set screw in the front of the machine. Start by loosening this screw. Next, move the holder down as low as possible by turning it as shown. Now you will be able to easily remove the ring compensator set. Do this by first pressing the lever on the right side back until it stops, as shown. Then lift the ring compensator set up and off. The bottom die is now visible. To remove it, first move the holder back up. Then lock the set screw on the front of the machine. Take the puncher insert it into one of the holes on the side of the die and loosen. We can now remove and, in a future situation, replace the bottom die if needed. Reversing what we just did will leave us with our bottom die back in place and its holder moved down away from the punch in position. This is where we move on to setting the cutting position of the bottom die. With the bottom die holder all the way down, the bottom die won't even be close to a position where it will cut material. So begin by looking at the threads on the holder and moving the holder up enough to show about half of those threads. We are next going to do a test cut of our material, so we don't want an eyelet or washer to feed into position. Move the eyelet raceway away from the die set and use the puncher to hold it. You can easily stop the flow of washers by placing a wire tie into the raceway as shown. There will be one or two washers already in the slide mechanism. You can remove these by opening the cover over the flywheel and moving it manually. Here you can see a washer eject. This can be removed with long-nose pliers. As we proceed to calibrating the position of the bottom die through a series of test cuts, it is important to emphasize that you can break the blade, ruining the bottom die by doing this procedure incorrectly. Pay careful attention and you'll be making great cuts with just a little effort. With the die in the current position, connect the machine to electricity and turn it on. For the remainder of the die setting procedure, we are operating the machine without the front safety cover on. This is to provide the best possible view of what is happening. There is a safety ring between the top and bottom dies to prevent fingers from being in harm's way. However, we recommend you use the safety cover when you do this procedure. Place your material on top of the bottom die. Activate the foot pedal of the machine. Now look at this in slow motion, and you can see this causes the punch to descend and then the top die. The top die will have no effect in this instance because no eyelet is being set, but the punch begins to indent the material. From here, you need to go through a series of small incremental changes in the height of the die by turning the die holder, followed by test cuts, until you reach the point where the blade just barely cuts through the material. When you reach this point, tighten the set screw on the front of the machine, which locks the die holder in position. Now we move on to setting the top die position. The first step is to allow the eyelets and washers to feed again. Remove the wire tie on the washer side and remove the puncher holding the eyelet raceway. Do a test setting. At this point, the top die is in the position furthest away from the bottom die. This means your test setting will be barely closed. This could be what you desire if you have very thick material, or are maybe eyeleting corrugated material. More likely, you'll want to have your setting closed more tightly. This is extremely easy to accomplish because the amount of movement of the top die down toward the bottom die will be exactly the same as the change in closing of the setting. Loosen the lock nut on the top die, move the die down slightly, tighten the lock nut, and then make a test setting. Inspect your setting. If it needs to be closed further, repeat these steps. As with calibrating the cutting blade on the bottom die, you should do this in small increments until you are happy with the result.